Last week, we have reviewed different financing methods available to companies. In this week, we have a separate chapter focusing on securitization. By definition, securitization is the financial practice of pooling various types of contractual debts or other income-generating non-debt assets and selling their related cash flows to third-party investors as securities. The history of securitization can date back to year 1968, when the U.S. Congress addressed the need to develop the secondary market for residential mortgages. In that year, Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae were created as government-sponsored entities to secure home mortgages. The practice of securitization became very successful throughout the years. Around 60% of home loans were securitized from year 2000 onwards. The principle of securitization was cloned to other assets as well, such as leasing, auto loans, and account receivables, as securitized products with its value backed by cash flows from other assets is called asset-backed securities, or ABS. An ABS is a debt security in nature and pays out fixed interest and principal payment to its holders. In theory, any asset with predictable future cash flow can be securitized. Issuers of asset-backed securities pay fixed interest and principal to its investors in a manner similar to bonds, but there is a huge difference between bonds and securitization, in that securitization does not change an issuer's capital structure, but bond issuance will increase leverage. From an issuer's point of view, securitization in nature is the exchange of illiquid assets with predictable future cash flow for immediate cash. So we can see it does not change an issuer's right-hand side of the balance sheet. As we have discussed last week, an issuer should pay attention to its capital structure when raising money, because increased leverage will lead to lower credit rating and higher financing costs later on. Next, we will move on to discuss a typical securitization process. To start securitization, we first need to have an issuer or originator. The originator initially owns some illiquid assets. These assets are the underlying assets to be securitized, and they must be able to generate predictable cash flow in the future. In essence, it is the future cash flow of the assets that is securitized. If the originator is a commercial bank, examples of underlying assets may include residential mortgages, auto loans, or credit card loans. The underlying assets can also be loan debt related. For example, a leasing company may securitize its equipment lent to industrial companies. Further examples of income-generating assets include scenic spot tickets income, highway toll income. Ideally, the underlying asset should contain a large number of individual assets to form an asset pool. Similar to insurance, an asset pool consisting of a large number of individual assets reduces the risk of individual assets. In the next step, the asset pool will be sold to a special purpose vehicle, or SPV. An SPV is a tax-exempt entity formed for the special purpose of buying the assets from the originator. An SPV can take the form of a company, a trust, or a partnership. Once the assets are sold to the SPV, normally the SPV is bankruptcy remote. meaning that if the originator goes into bankruptcy, the assets being securitized will not be distributed to creditors of the originator. In order to be bankruptcy remote, the originator must transfer the ownership of the underlying assets to the SPV. Transfer of ownership can be achieved by selling the assets. Also, an SPV is prohibited from operating any businesses, and its sole purpose of existence is to hold the underlying asset pool. Sometimes, bankruptcy remote can get tricky for securitization without transferring the ownership of an asset. For example, a car rental company may securitize beneficiary rights of its future rental income that still owns the cars in order to run the car rental company. In case of bankruptcy of the car rental company, its assets, including all its cars, are subject to liquidation. Against the hazard of bankruptcy, other credit enhancement methods should be used to increase the creditworthiness of the securitized product. After the underlying assets are pooled and sold to the SPV, claims to the SPV in the form of asset-backed securities are available for sale to investors in the capital market. Investors can contribute money to the SPV, and then the money will be distributed to the originator, and the task of fundraising is completed. In the course of future operations, cash flow generated by the underlying assets will be distributed to investors. A servicer will be in charge of collecting the payments. Usually, the originator will take the role of a servicer. In the securitization process, an investment bank can act as an arranger to manage the process, and a credit rating agency will provide credit rating services to the securities. Credit rating is important because it can influence the interest rate of an ABS. Other parties involved in securitization include legal counsel and accounting consultants. As a means of credit enhancement, asset-backed securities are often split into tranches. There is generally a senior A tranche of securities and one or more subordinate tranches, for example, tranche B and C, etc. And last, an equity tranche. The senior classes have first claim on cash payments, while the subordinate class only starts to receive cash after the senior class investors have been fully repaid. This arrangement is often referred to as a cash flow waterfall. The last tranche of asset-backed security is considered equity and is usually purchased by the originator. This arrangement may mitigate the moral hazard of the originator pooling junk assets to an SPV. If the underlying asset pool becomes insufficient to make payments to the securities, for example, when loans default within a portfolio of low claims, the loss is absorbed first by the equity tranche and the subordinate tranches, and the upper level tranches remain unaffected until the losses exceed the entire amount of the subordinate tranches. Aside from building cash flow waterfalls, there are other ways to do credit enhancement. The first one is over-collateralization, which means the total value of assets to be securitized should exceed the face value of asset-backed securities. For example, an issuer may need 1.2 billion worth of assets to back up a total value of 1 billion worth of ABS. Over-collateralization also means cash flow generated by the underlying asset should be more than enough to cover principal and interest payment to the investors. The second approach is cash collateral account. This is a special cash asset reserve account set up to compensate for possible default events. Besides, third-party insurance can be introduced as external credit enhancement. A third party will guarantee principal and interest payments on the securities by taking the obligation to balance the difference between the underlying asset income and investors' expected return. Okay, in this video, we have discussed the theory of securitization. Thanks for watching. In our next video, we will take a more detailed look at mortgage-backed securities.